All right, so here's a clearly a two-dimensional problem. So let's just look at what I have going on here. I have some kind of a shape where this surface here is held at a cold temperature. This surface is at a high temperature. And then as the flow is moving through here, let's see, initially it's got kind of a small area. So for the first centimeter of its path, it's got a small area. This is 0.5 by into the page. This whole shape is 1 centimeter thick. So 0.5 centimeters squared, that's the area of this initial region. And then it expands into this larger area. So now this would be 2 centimeters by 1, so 2 centimeters squared in this region. And that's the last 2 centimeters of the path. So somehow energy has to go from this plane to this plane. And of course, you know, in reality, this is going to be some kind of two-dimensional temperature distribution. The conductivity of all of this material is the same as 10 watts per meter Kelvin. And what I would like to do is not have to solve some complicated partial differential equation or mesh this up using some kind of finite element software. I'd at least like to estimate what is the rate of heat transfer that I'm going to get through this structure. Because if, again, I'm happy with every possible value it could be that I can estimate in 5 minutes using these 1D resistance equations, then I could be pretty happy and just move on and spend my time doing something more productive, right? So we talked about 2 ways to model this. We said that we can model this using the isothermal limit, right? And the isothermal limit is going to give me a lower bound on the resistance of this, because it's basically, as I move through here, it's going to allow the heat to instantaneously take advantage of all of this area. If I have a lower bound on the resistance, then I'm going to get an upper bound on the rate of heat transfer, right? Heat transfer is delta T over R. So a small resistance is going to give me a large heat transfer. The other thing I can do is an adiabatic limit, which says, as I'm going through here, I'm not going to allow the heat to spread at all. So that's going to give me an upper bound on the resistance. It's going to give me a lower bound on the heat transfer rate, right? That's going to say this. That's going to predict the smallest heat transfer rate. So that will bound my situation. So let's go through those 2 estimates. So here's the first estimate. A lower bound on the resistance is the isothermal limit. It basically says that for this region here, this distance L2, I'm going to have H2 times W. So I'll have L2 divided by K times H2 times W. And then for this region here, I'll have L1 divided by K times H1 times W, right? So I will sum these 2 resistances together. That's my isothermal resistance, and then my heat transfer is TH minus TC divided by that resistance. And so when I plug that information into ease, which apparently I didn't bother to start, so hang on 1 second. Okay, so when I plug that information into ease, so that's what I did here. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. So here's my isothermal resistance. This is Q dot isothermal. What I find is that Q dot isothermal is 6.67 watts. So that's the biggest rate of heat transfer I would expect, right? I'm using the smallest resistance, and I get 6.67 watts. So now let's do the adiabatic limit. So for this region here, obviously the resistance is the same. But when I get to this region here, I don't get to use H2. I have to keep the heat transfer in this smaller H1 region, right? So I use H1 here. And if I do that in the same ease code, let's see, that's what I did here, then my Q dot should be quite a bit larger, right? So this resistance is going to be, quite a bit smaller. So this resistance is a lot larger, so the Q dot is going to be smaller, and it's 3.3 watts, right? So 3.3 watts. So I've bounded my results. It's got to be somewhere between 3.3 and 6.6 watts. One model that you see for a situation like this, so by like this I mean a situation where the energy is moving a certain length, but it's moving through some kind of a conductor that has varying area, right? So there's areas that are different depending on where I am along the path. sometimes you'll see people use what's called the average area model. So they're going to take the average area, A bar, that you get by integrating along the path. So this is how A bar is defined, right? You integrate along the path the area, and then you just divide by the length, and you get some kind of length averaged area that you would put into here to get A bar. So we can do that as well, just to compare it to the other two models that we have. If I'm going to evaluate A bar for this particular problem, it's pretty simple because the area is constant for one part of the path. So this integral for the first part of the path is going to be h1 times w times L1. And then for the second part of the path, the area is going to be h2 times w times L2. And then I divide by L, which is L1 plus L2. And I get A bar. And I would take Q dot and divide it by A bar. I'm sorry, and Q dot, slow down. I would take the temperature difference and divide it by this resistance that I get using this A bar, which is what I did, I think, right here. So this is the ease file, which is posted on the web page if you want to look at it. And what I'm going to find is that Q dot is, Q dot I can't find. Oh, Q dot is right here, 10 watts. So that's kind of interesting if you think about it, right? We already had a model that said the biggest Q dot could ever be a 6.7 watts. The smallest it could ever be is 3.3 watts. And then this new model that I came up with based on the average area, it estimates 10 watts. So it's actually worse than either of these other two guys. And it provides an upper bound on the heat transfer rate, which means it provides a lower bound on the resistance. And that lower bound is actually even worse than the lower bound we already had from the isothermal model, right? So let's think about why that might be. Now let's do that by thinking about kind of a thought experiment. What happens if the area anywhere inside of here goes to zero? So for this particular problem, what happens as the area here goes to zero? What happens if I take H1 to zero? So the real resistance, if H1 truly goes to zero between 300 Kelvin over here and 100 Kelvin, is infinite, right? There is no path anymore for the heat to go if I shrink this down to zero. And if you look at the isothermal model, if I take H1 to zero, then that's going to take this to infinity, right? It's taking this part of the resistance path to infinity, and it will go to infinity. It will report back to us that, yeah, if you do that, you're going to have an infinite resistance. If I take the adiabatic model, it does the same thing. It correctly predicts that the resistance should go to infinity. On the other hand, if I look at the average area model, the average area, if I go from here to here and I shrink this down to zero, the average area does not go to zero, right? The average area is now just, some fraction of the area here. In fact, I guess it would be the area that I have here times the fraction of the length that that area occupies, which is right here. So when I calculate the resistance, I don't get infinity. I get a finite value. So clearly, this is a gross underestimate of the actual resistance in the limit that you have large changes in the area, right? And that's kind of what you're seeing here. The other model that you'll see sometimes applied is what's called an average length model. So here you have a situation where you have an area, but that area is characterized by different conduction lengths depending on where you're at, right? Here we had a length that had different conduction areas depending on where you're at. So here we used an average area. Here we might use an average length, right? So now I would calculate the resistance based on the average length of the path over this entire area. And the average length I'd get by taking the area average of all of the lengths, right? And what you're going to find is that this is actually even worse than the adiabatic model, right? So if you look at the true resistance here, R, we just got done saying that we have a lower bound of the isothermal model. We have an even worse lower bound of the average area model. I have an upper bound, which is the adiabatic model. This thing that we just talked about here is actually an even worse upper bound. It's the average length model. And to see why that's the case, imagine the situation where at some point in this area, these two surfaces actually touch, right? They touch one another, so the length goes to zero. If that's the case, then the actual resistance should go to zero, right? There's no resistance to moving energy across a zero length. But, this is not going to report back to you as zero resistance. On the other hand, the isothermal model and the adiabatic model both would, right? So again, they do a better job of capturing the physics. So this is kind of our hierarchy of approximate models, right? If I don't want to actually estimate the true resistance because it's too hard, I have these different options that I can use to use 1D type models to estimate and bound the true resistance without actually having to calculate it. And you'll use these a lot in real life when you have, you're confronted with some kind of relatively complicated situation and you just want a back of the envelope estimate, right? You don't want to spend 2 days thinking about it. These are really nice tools to pull out of your pocket to figure out, okay, approximately how big is the resistance, and not only that, what is the range of values that it could even have, right? And if that range again is small enough, or every part of that range is fine with you, then you're done, and you've just saved yourself kind of a lot of time. Okay, so that's resistances, and actually even more than that, it's sort of resistance approximations and how you use these things. Next time we're going to move on to still steady state conduction problems, right? Still one-dimensional, but we're going to add an additional kind of complication, which is that we're going to have thermal energy generation going on inside of the volume. So here, this volume didn't generate any kind of energy, right? It just sat there and let energy go through it. There's going to be situations where the volume actually is the site of thermal energy generation, right? So we're converting energy from one form into thermal energy, and that's going to complicate our situation. It's going to make the problem a little bit more interesting.